You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Welcome back to CrimsonCast. Galen Clavia, Scott Caulfield joining you midweek here in May as we hurtle towards Memorial Day weekend. We're almost there, Scott, and a lot going on in the city of Indianapolis over this weekend. Obviously, for those of us who have recovered from that gut punch Pacers loss in Game 1, wow. I felt all kinds of feelings that I didn't think I was capable of feeling anymore.
That was a gut punch. It's like the Bill. I don't know where that fits in the Bill Simmons level of gut punches, but man, that was that sucked.
But that going on, we got the fever and Caitlin Clark around, and then of course
racers and Pacers, man, like legitimate racers and Pacers.
Back. I know it's like we're in high school again. It's pretty wild. But yeah, we're going to focus on the Indy 500 for this episode as Scott and I, for those of you who followed CrimsonCast for a long time, both big fans of the race. We've both been going for years, and many of you in the audience are fans of the Indy 500. I'll warn you right now, there's no IU content at all in this. So
numbers going down. Just people, catch you next time.
It's funny. Actually, I was thinking about this yesterday. Like, we've posted some podcasts recently, and, anything with basketball content, it's like you've got thousands of people listening or watching. I posted that football podcast with Taylor the other day, and it's got like 400 views. It's like, I know we love football. We've got so many football-centric fans. But it's kind of like when you read about how it's like the Bronny James thing, where it's like, no, we shouldn't be talking about Bronny James as a draft prospect. And yet the ratings during those segments are like sky high, and you get, tens of thousands of views. You got to give the people what they want. And so this is
I'm going to do like an ESPN tease here. We're going to do 40 minutes of Indy 500 talk, but then Galen's going to have the hottest basketball take at the very end that you've ever heard.
Right after this break. No. So it's but no, we're doing this is one for us and one for our Indy 500 fans. So we're gonna jump into that. But first, before we get to that, just a reminder that you need to check out homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network, and increasingly the place to go for all of your racing apparel needs. They have jumped fully into the racing world. They've got collections available on the website I'm looking at right now. They have an entire Hendrick Motorsports collection. They have an entire Arrow McLaren collection. And of course,
of the Indy 500 they got.
And they've got the Indianapolis 500. They've got shirts. They've got hats. They've got just a little bit of everything across the board. Some really
making the race this year. The
trucker hat is making the race. Absolutely. Okay. So
inaugural race for the trucker hat.
Probably not the bomber jacket. I think, even though it looks like we might get a high under 80, I don't think I'm going to wear the bomber jacket to the Speedway on Sunday.
That's a bold move. Move.
I've seen people, like, normally those are the people who are like, that guy's passing out. Like, it's like 10 a.m. Yeah, he's done.
That guy's passed out on the ground.
We've actually used the bomber jacket to cover the body up until the coroner arrives. But so anyway, Home Field Apparel. This is where you're going to find your racing apparel to wear, obviously. So check them out. Use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. And you've got all kinds of events going on this week. The one that you want to check out is actually in Broad Ripple on Friday. Still some tickets available. Half Liter Barbecue is the location. We've got Shutdown Full Cast with special guest Alana King coming in to talk the race, it's Shutdown Fullcast. If you haven't checked it out, just check it out. You'll understand immediately. And Home Field, a proud sponsor of that. Doors open at 6. Go to homefieldapparel.com. Go to their social media. Still tickets available. So go check that out. Also, just a reminder, we're on Substack, crimsoncast.substack.com. It's free to sign up. We will send you podcast info right to your door or your email. The door would be a little bit weird, I agree. But definitely to your email. We also have a paid subscriber option. Scott just dropped a video about some priority point stuff. We're going to have another video coming up here relatively soon. So check that out. It's CrimsonCast.substack.com. We'd love to have you as a part of the community. All right, Scott, let's talk. Let's start off by recapping Qual's weekend. As that happened this past weekend, we got the field of 33 set. We sort of had bumping. Kind of, it was a little anticlimactic, which we'll talk about in a second. But obviously, we want to focus our attention at first, I think, on the top of the field and talk about how qualifying went in general. Let's maybe focus first on the results, and then we could talk about the quality therein. Looking at this, it's Team Penske across the board on the front row. And you end up with Scott McLaughlin on the pole, Will Power in the middle of row one, Joseph Newgarden on the outside of row one. You get Alexander Rossi on the inside of row two. You got Kyle Larson, who's been a pretty big name, in the middle of row two. So you've got two teams for the first 5 spots, and then the wild card of Santino Ferrucci, who finished as 6th in qualifying, is on the outside of row two. And then just to round out the first 3 rows, Rinus VeeKay recovers from a crash, ends up finishing 10th in qualifying, Pato O'Ward, and then Felix Rosenqvist. And then we can kind of filter through the field from there. So first of all, your overall impressions of how qualifying went and whatever take-homes you've got from the top of the field.
Yeah, I mean, so do we know if Penske got extra push to pass for qualifying? No, I know they don't use it on the ovals. Well, the other thing that I find interesting with the way the field shook out, I would not have had this on my bingo card, is Meyer-Shank Racing having the highest placing Honda in the field. So Felix Rosenqvist is the highest placing Honda, and then Rahal Letterman has Sato in the next spot, and then Kirkwood and Andretti. To get to Ganassi, you've got to go down to Palou in row 5. Wow. That's kind of surprising. And you do see, of the first 9 spots, 8 of them, 1 through 8, are Chevys. So it does seem like Chevy does have the more horsepower, although maybe a little more reliability issues. But this is something you've seen over years where, normally going into one of the 500s, one of the 2 engines seems to have it over the other, although it normally seems it's hard to parse here because you don't know if it's Chevy or if it's Penske. Because in the end, while Ganassi has been a very good team, it's been a team dominated by Dixon and Franchitti, and then other driver. Palou has done very well, but at the Indianapolis 500, it's really been those 2 drivers who have kind of led Ganassi. I mean, Andretti's almost had a little more high-level success than Ganassi at times. Yeah. But, it's like, is it Penske or is it Chevy every year? Because Penske is always the class of the most always the class of the field in the 500.
It is interesting, though, because it feels like every year you've either got Penske at the top of their game and Ganassi struggling
off the radar, yeah,
or vice versa. Like 2022, Scott Dixon's on the pole, Alex Palou is second on the grid, and I think the highest qualifying Penske that year was Will Power, and he was in the middle of row 4. I think I've got that down right. And so it is. I've always found that fascinating. Like one team has their crap together and the other team doesn't, at least not the way that they do in the rest of the series. And then you've got, whether it's Arrow McLaren or whether it's Andretti or whether it's Meyer-Shank, kind of sprinkled in around them. But I do think, clearly Penske doesn't just seem to have the engine dialed in, but the way their cars looked throughout all of qualifying, they were just in a completely different class, it felt like. Like even Rossi, who was clearly the next fastest driver, both on Saturday and then also on Sunday, did not look like he was really in the conversation for the first row, let alone the pole. And it wasn't just the engine, it was the way the cars drove. Like there seemed to be almost like very little effort. I mean, it was clearly effort, but it looked like there was very little effort being given by the Penske cars to do what they did.
Yep. No, I would also say, I was thinking this, there's not a lot of great stat sites for IndyCar, but
shocking.
I know, shocking. 8 former winners in the field. I think that's close to, if not, I don't want to say the record, but it's really close to the most that I've seen in a long time, along with, I think there's 1, 2, like a bunch of rookies too. So it's an odd field that's basically you're either a winner or a rookie, or you're, Marco Andretti, kind of in that mold. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We talked about this last time. I still have I'm having a harder time getting excited for this field, and I'm not sure why. You and I talked about, I think there's a lack of personality. And then you're like, I really watch the racing of the personalities, which is a very valid point that I was thinking about. And I'm like, I'm not sure I have an answer to that, but I think I graphed on the personality of the driver to the car. And it's just, when you look at
this is basically Elon Musk's dream. Just install personalities into vehicles. It's like Elon really just wants the plot of Cars, but in real life.
We can maybe get a Cybertruck to be in the field, see what that looks like.
Just sets fire to the whole speedway. Yeah.
I mean, my biggest fear with the way things shook out, and I've heard from a couple people kind of in the speedway area, is just that, the way that the Penske cars were so dialed in, and the fact they're 1, 2, 3 across the field, does this just become a race that Penske kind of just dominates the race and dominates the front of the field? There was a couple of years ago, like Dixon and Franchitti were just swapping first and second for like the first 180 laps.
And that may be, but I'll go back. I'll use 2022 as an example. Ganassi kind of dominates the start, and Kanaan was in a Ganassi car that year as well. But the order of finish there ended up being Ericsson, Award, who was Aero McLaren, Kanaan, and then Rosenqvist, who was also Aero McLaren. And
Diggs had a crazy crash out in that one, right?
Was that the one well, that's kind of the point. Is like you end up with this situation where, yes, it's very possible that you're going to have a situation where Penske could dominate, but as we've seen, mechanical issues will knock out one of the cars early on, because that just seems to be how it is. And the idea with the current configuration of the cars and the way that they are engineered for this speedway, I mean, when was the last time we really saw a driver pull away from the field, or even a pack of drivers pull away from the field and really get that much distance? I mean,
it's been a while.
Yeah. So I'm not as concerned, but I certainly understand the concerns. I mean, last year, I think what was it? The top 15 cars finished the race within 5.7 seconds of each other, which is nuts. And you had to get down to 18th. The top 16 cars were within 5.8 seconds of each other. You had to get down to 18th to find your first lapped vehicle. So, I think certainly you'll have a situation where there'll be some separation early, but that's liable to get bunched up down the line. It's just, for me, it's more like it's hard to envision a scenario towards the end of the race where either a Honda is going to have the horsepower to compete with a Penske Chevy, or another team's Chevy is going to be able to compete with Penske and the way that they've got their cars set up. And I say that knowing that you could have everything go sideways, like that's entirely possible, but that just kind of feels like the vibe right now.
No, I completely agree. And you also have, from the high-level teams, you assume that Penske and Ganassi are the two high-level teams. With Penske, you just have more kind of drivers in their prime with McLaughlin and Newgarden. If you assume that Power is kind of on the tail end of his career, that it's weird that looking at this field through the lens of, watching some of the old races again. You watch some of those races in the 80s and 90s, you'll see there's a 1 year, like I think in 94, when like AJ Foyt was in the front row, but it's like, all right, but he really wasn't a front row caliber car. And then he didn't finish there. So I wonder if that's kind of the willpower spot, but then you also look to the back of the field, Dixon's finishing in, starting in the 7th row, just not a great position. I always look to like the mid to late 80s was always like, Lone Star JR, Johnny Rutherford, always was kind of in the field in the back. And as a young kid, it's like, oh man, like there's a winner back there. And it's like, yeah, no, he's not going to do anything. I wonder if this is the new Dixon, but you look at, Dixon and Palou are really the two bullets that Ganassi has. And it just feels like maybe Penske has an extra kind of younger in his prime driver.
Possibly. I mean, one of the, and this is something I think you got to bring Elio Castroneves into the conversation when you start talking about this as well. One of the things that sometimes throws people off who are just starting to follow IndyCar for the first time is that qualifying speed doesn't really mean that much.
Yeah, fair.
It's kind of just show ponying, to see how fast the cars can go. But race configuration and the ability to drive in traffic, the ability to avoid incidents, it's ironic that we bring Scott Dixon up with this, because Dixon's actually been involved in a bunch of incidents over the course of his time in Indy. It's why he doesn't have more wins. But
which is wild, because in all other races, he's able to get out of incidents. And yeah.
It is kind of nuts to think about, just from a historical perspective, how he has had more than his share of bad luck, I would say, in terms of what he's done in the race. Going all the way back to like his first few years, he was 17th and then 8th, and then 24th, in his first 3 races in Indy. And that's kind of how his pattern has gone to some degree over time. I mean, in what was it, 2021, he was 17th. In 2022, he was 21st. Last year, he was 6th. Anyway, I say all that because race setup is very different.
Yep.
And this is where a guy like Santino Ferrucci has shined. It's where Helio Castroneves has shined, Tony Kanaan. Sticking around that long and not getting down a lap and avoiding any major mistakes will put you in a better spot. And then it really, to some degree, comes down to fuel strategy and luck. And so that's where it's hard to count anybody out that has history in the race and at least a decent car. And it's hard to say exactly where the line for decent cars is. Like, even in the lower ranges of the qualified groups, you're still talking about a bunch of drivers who were very, very close to each other in terms of their qualifying speeds. You're talking 3-4 miles an hour difference from the top of the field to the bottom, essentially. That may matter if you're in a dead sprint, but maybe not even that, because race trim is going to be so different from qualifying trim.
I would say, you're 100% right about the qualifying trim versus the race trim and the speeds. I would kind of put the line of demarcation at row 7. Row 7 is Marco, Elio, and Scott Dixon. After that, I'm not going to read through the list, but you have, Canapino, you have Stingray Robb, Romain Grosjean. You have a lot of rookies and a lot of guys who I would be shocked if, Christian Lundgaard wins this race, or Pietro Fittipaldi. Ericsson has won the race before, but starting from that far back is tough. So it does feel like row 8 and beyond, I would be pretty shocked if any of those people won the race.
I think that's fair. And even some of the folks who are in front of that, like it's hard to envision like Kiffin Simpson being able to put something together throughout the course of the race, or Marcus Armstrong like that. They just like rookies in the middle of the field like that. But I do think that a lot of these cars are close together in terms of their abilities. And this is where Indy just kind of becomes a character in the play that it itself is putting on. And that will be
and this is where the teams matter, where, I really like Santino Ferrucci. I think he had a really good car last year. And what happened is what I expect to probably happen this year. What happened last year is that he's on an AJ Foyt team, and the team is just over 5 to 6 or 7 pit stops, which you're going to have in this race. You got to be flawless in all of them, because that's the thing with Penske is like one of those guys between McLaughlin, Power, and Newgarden, one of them might have a pit mess up, but like of those 3 teams, one of those teams is going perfect for all those pit stops. And so if you're the one bullet that AJ Foyt has, you got to be perfect. And I just don't trust AJ Foyt to have a perfect pit stop every single time. And I think that's going to kill guys like Ferrucci and even some of the team, like Arrow McLaren. I'm just not sure they have the team setup that Penske does, because Penske there's only so many good, engineers and pit guys and crew guys for IndyCar, and Penske hires all of them.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that issue with Ram Rahal. There was that, it, what was it, 2 years ago or last year, where he's in contention to win and then he loses a tire because of a pit stop error. It really does matter. And even if you want to draw some of the distinctions, obviously Andretti's had other problems, but they've been just that much slightly slower than Penske and Ganassi in the pits, and that's created an issue. It'll be interesting because you've got more teams that are kind of in that contending range, and we've seen them have some success. We obviously Meyer Shank won a race with Elio. Arrow McLaren seems like they've got their stuff together mostly. Like, we haven't seen any, that I can recall at least, hideous pit errors or problems there timing wise. But you're just trying to overcome a monster with Penske and what a well-oiled machine that is. And that's not a new thing. That's been the case for a long time. It is just interesting how Penske's luck has not always transitioned into actual success in the 500. And that's probably, it's just random statistical noise rather than being something that you necessarily point to as a trend. Because when you got strong cars and strong drivers, that tends to trump quite a few things.
Yeah, when they do have the defending champion in Newgarden. And the other thing that I was curious about, just taking a step back from drivers, is just weather. This is the first year in a while that I can remember there being concern on my part looking at the weather forecast for Sunday. Right now, it looks like it's going to be warm, but there's like almost a 70% chance of thunderstorms throughout the day.
See, one of the things I've found fascinating about this year, because I follow the weather religiously, this. is I read that on the IndyCar subreddit, or I see it on Twitter, and then other people are like, what are you talking about? Like, for instance, you just said 70% chance of thunderstorms. I went to my weather app, which is AccuWeather, and there's a 35% chance of precipitation, but no real like chance of thunderstorms. What is forecast is a heavy wind, like a 13-mile-an-hour south-southeasterly breeze gusting to 22, and cloud cover, which to me, that sounds like like really fast racing conditions, because like a high of 76 with 88% cloud cover means a relatively cool track. It also means like some weird stuff going on in terms of that crosswind, because if that's coming in from the south-southeast, like that's what hitting the drivers as they're going onto the front stretch, and it's at their back as they're coming down the back stretch. I don't know. The weather is fascinating, and it's Indiana, so we won't know until probably 12 hours before the race what we should expect. But there is such a wide spread of things as far as what might happen there. But I understand your concerns.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we'll still go and we'll see. And it's been a hot minute since the race has been rained out or rain delayed. I think 2005 or so. It's been a while. So hopefully, knock on wood, that doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, what are you? You know, it's funny. I was going to ask. I always kind of think I don't do this as much anymore. But who would be the best storyline to come out of this? But it never seems to matter, because we've had Marcus Ericsson win, who's kind of a boring dude with a chocolate company that you can't buy in the U.S. as a sponsor. And it's like, all right, that sucks. But then you have like Newgarden wins, and he jumps in the crowd. He's an American guy, and it's like no bump. It's like that. You've had stories where it seems like it makes, I mean, outside of like Marco Andretti winning, I'm not sure if there's any real storyline. And honestly, I think where the series is at, I'm not sure anybody winning is, unless like Marco Andretti somehow like jumps over Graham Rahal's car and wins, like, and he drags his car like the Turbo movie into the finish line. Like, I just don't think this makes any kind of national news at all, no matter who wins.
Well, and I agree with you. I think, but I don't know that should be something that IndyCar is concerned about, because you can't do anything, So you just, from my perspective, I look at it and I say, well, what would be the best stories? So to me, there's a cluster of like 4 drivers who I think if they won the race would open up a brand new front in the idea of who are the preeminent drivers.
I want to guess.
Go ahead.
All right, I want to guess your 4. So you have 4, right?
I have. Let me double check my count here. Yes, I've got 4.
Okay. Alex Palou
is one of them. Absolutely.
Scott McLaughlin.
No. So here's the thing. I think McLaughlin's already positioned.
Okay. Because
he's with Penske. I don't think Scott McLaughlin winning opens up any new fronts. I guess I think it'd be a great story. But
okay. Colton Herta.
Yep.
Pato O'Ward.
Yep.
And this is where it gets interesting. Stingray. No, I'm just kidding. Not Stingray, Rob. Probably, like, I mean, I think Santino Ferrucci. I think Santino Ferrucci is like 2 years away from getting a good ride, but I think that would be a wow. This guy won a 500 with AJ Foyt, but I'm also a fan of his, so maybe I'm biased.
I actually was going to go with Rinus VeeKay.
Oh, that's a really good one. Yeah.
But I mean, and Ferrucci was a wild card in as much as the problem with Ferrucci is the baggage. And some people don't care about it at all. Some people, that's all they care about. Like he is by far, among the fan groups that I observe, the most polarizing figure. But he's not really polarizing, because everybody just seems to dislike the guy except for Scott. Right. And so it would be interesting if he won, but I think that the benefits for IndyCar would be much greater if one of those 4 drivers that I mentioned won. Because I just don't think. I think the problem that the first part of this season opened up for the series is that there is now a perception that Penske owns the series and that his team is getting all of the breaks, and that right. there's a tainted element to whatever success they have, fair or unfair. So for a driver from Ed Carpenter Racing, like Rinus VeeKay is driving for this year, Palou or O'Ward, who are both like young, exciting drivers. I think O'Ward in particular, being of Mexican heritage, that would get a bunch of people interested that might not otherwise be. And certainly Herta, with both the fact that he's an American driver and also is a legacy driver and has been kind of sniffing around higher level success. I think any of those drivers, there's a lot of knock-on opportunities down the road there that suddenly put them back in the conversation at a much higher level.
totally agree. In using that same logic, the worst case scenario is one of those guys leading with like 6 laps to go and a controversial red flag, which then allows McLaughlin or Newgarden to win.
Yeah.
Even though if it was totally legitimate, like, and it's something that I did in one of our VIP videos about IndyCar, which again, keeping in the VIP section, because I'm assuming nobody really cares about this stuff. But, this is, IndyCar is not the NBA. It's not the NFL. It's not, it's a collective of people who are also kind of their own owners and have their own points of view. And in the end, Penske buying the series was probably the best thing for the series and a steward that understood the series. But he's also an owner of the series. It's a conflict of interest. It's always going to be tough to kind of square that circle. And so
you can get away
where if it happens, even if there's no connection, it's going to look just funky after the season you've had.
And I think it's important for people to remember, like this is auto sports. Like this is how it works. Like, I mean, the previous owner of the Speedway, Tony George, owned a team, and his, I don't know, what is Ed Carpenter to him? I forget the relation.
Like second nephew
or something like that, owns a team and has been a driver. But Tony George's teams were never that good. So it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, the France family owned a team in NASCAR, but they were never like the preeminent team, at least not in recent history. So this would
be like the NFL is like giving the Jaguars, like, hey, you guys own the NFL now.
No, it's like the Rooney family like runs the league. And oh, by the way, the Steelers keep winning Super Bowls. How does that happen? It's but so this is a unique thing where, yes, I think Penske's ownership and stewardship certainly took the series to a better place than it was. But then you have this big cheating scandal involving the push to pass stuff. And so there's this perception that if, as you said, if for a second year in a row, you have a situation where we do this rules thing that we've never really done before, and it just happens to benefit a Penske driver, that's a real issue. That said, I also think just in general, Indy being such a high profile event, being able to spread the wealth out a little bit is helpful. And there's other good stories. You mentioned like the Marco Andretti story. I don't think Marco's actually going to win. There's a reason why he doesn't win these things. And it's so hard to do as a one-off driver, unless you're Helio Castroneves, where you're just kind of a supernatural guy on this particular track. Ed Carpenter, I still don't understand why every media member that talks about Ed Carpenter's like, he's beloved by the fans and people really want to see him win. And it's like, I got to be honest, I've never talked with a single fan who's like, God, I love Ed Carpenter. I really want to see Ed Carpenter win. I not that people don't like him, but I don't think that's that big of a story. I think the Romain Grosjean stuff has faded. Like everybody just wanted to, we saw him in Drive to Survive, and we want him to have success. And I feel like people are like, oh, he's actually just kind of a mid-tier guy at best, just like he was in Drive to Survive. I wonder why.
Yeah. Even that would be a guy getting a 5th win. Like that would be a really big racing story.
There's this second category of guys, and again, I'm going to leave the Penske guys out of it to some degree. But what's a better story? Rossi winning his second, Sato winning another one, Ryan Hunter-Reay in a one-off winning a second one after
Lee Diffie's Captain America. The most of all the things that they do on the broadcast, it's like, you are the only person who calls him Captain America. Even dressed up as Captain America for Halloween, kids would be like, aren't you Ryan Hunter-Reay?
It is the fetch of IndyCar. It's like, just stop trying to make it happen. Or Kyle Kirkwood winning his first, which seems a little bit unlikely. He's still relatively young in his career, and he doesn't seem to have a great car underneath him. Like of those,
Sato one, the third Sato win would be bananas. You and I had the discussion about him after he won his second in 2020. Just what a weird legacy he has. And really, I think a much better legacy at Indy than people would look when you look at his finishes, 2 wins, a second, like he's way farther up the list. And I think a lot of people would like to say, and if you give him a third, it's suddenly like, this guy is, I mean, I'm not sure it's going to happen, but that would be a really interesting discussion of like where you slot Sato.
I know exactly where you slot him, at least post World War II. I think at that point he is like equal with Johnny Rutherford. Like he has to be like, and Johnny Rutherford's like this weird figure. Like, part of it is just because we didn't hear from Johnny Rutherford a lot after he stopped driving. So like
Right.
Bobby Unser, who also won 3 races, is always going to have this kind of outsized level of importance in the sport, partially because of him and partially because of his brother and partially because of his nephew. Johnny Rutherford kind of exists in this weird ether where, he won in 74, he won in 76, he won in 80. It's like, I think those were the 3 years that he won the race. And he was just kind of around for so many other races that you end up with this situation where no one quite knows where to put him, because he was in that period of racing where we hadn't really fully formed the teams. And unless you were a driver that really like you were an AJ Foyt, who was so omnipresent throughout the sport, you didn't get the same level of vibe. And I kind of feel that way about Sato. Sato is hard to nail down in terms of what his legacy is really going to be. But
to me, it would also be interesting throwing him then you have the real interesting discussion of him and Franchitti, because it's like if Sato he didn't, but if Sato passes Franchitti in that race of 2012, Sato has 4 and Franchitti has 2.
Or if Sato completes the pass, what was it in 2017, 2018? I mean, there's that
he can be a 5-time winner. It's bananas.
I know it's like right there on the doorstep.
Rutherford has his 3 wins and then was kind of a back marker for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the major wins in Johnny Rutherford's career. I mean, he had 27 wins in Champ Car. And he had 60 podiums. He won a race in 1986, for God's sake. The dude had a career that lasted a long time. Ran 314 races, and yet he won 1 kart championship in 1980. He was a sprint car champ in 1965. He won 3 Indy 500s, and that's really all anybody knows him for. So that's kind of, and again with Sato,
he doesn't have a lot of other wins outside of the 500s.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Sato from a historical perspective, he has 6 wins total in his IndyCar series career, 14 podiums, yet he has the 2 Indy 500 wins and a bunch of other stuff that nobody particularly cares about. I don't know. I do find his position fascinating, because I mean, in terms of his Indy history, he's right there with Rutherford, but he's clearly didn't have the same level of success as a driver overall, which makes it even harder to classify him.
Let's keep doing this. I like this where, if people win where they fit, it's great. I think it's going to be, I've never liked somebody winning the double or being in, the NASCAR thing. So Kyle Larson winning is kind of that would be a little bit tough to deal with all of that discussion that would come out of it.
Yeah, here's the thing with Larson. I mean, I'm as I think many IndyCar fans are, I get annoyed at NBC trying to foist NASCAR drivers on the series and trying to filter everything, which they do. If you watch the coverage on NBC and on Peacock, everything, whether it's Dale Earnhardt Jr., who I genuinely like as a commentator, or whether that bearded dude who looks like he should be hosting a Food Network show, or maybe does
host the Floor is Lava on Netflix.
Sorry, I'm not up on all my kids.
You're saying that it's he literally hosts a show like that, it's just,
or like Jeff Burton hanging around that. I do resent that a bit as an IndyCar guy, but
I'd love to hear Lee Diffie be like, giggity, 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 Captain America, giggity, giggity, giggity. Anyway, sorry.
But you cannot deny how talented of a driver. Larson feels like a completely different animal from the normal person who would try to do the double. 25 wins in NASCAR, 170 top 10s, won the series in 2021. I mean, he's, and you just, what?
Competed for the pole here. I mean, really.
And I mean, he just has this ridiculous, I mean, if you haven't go to his Wikipedia page, you just look at all of the things he won or has won over the course of his career. It would be a great story. But it would feel, there's always this was kind of the concern when they why am I blanking on the name of the F1 driver? Fernando Alonso came in, and everybody's like, "Oh, Alonso's just going to come in and laugh everybody," and then that's
great.
But it feels like with Larson, the danger there, as always, is if he goes out and wins in his rookie appearance and then gets on a plane and flies to Charlotte and competes that evening, it kind of makes the whole series feel like a junior circuit to some degree. And that So it's a great story on the one hand, but it's also a story that if you're a big fan of IndyCar, you probably shouldn't be rooting for, whatever you feel about Kyle Larson as a driver on an individual basis.
Well, and it also, I mean, the chance of him winning the 500 and then also winning the Coca-Cola 600 is minuscule. So, if he wins the 500, he probably will finish, 15th or 20th in the I mean, I do not keep up with NASCAR, but the chance of him also getting a podium finish at the 600 is tough. And then for a normal, just random fan to be like, oh, so he won that race, but like couldn't even finish in the top 10 in the other ones. So like, that's how I know which series is better. And that's a completely unfair narrative. None of those things are fair, but a person just kind of walking by the racing section, that's immediately what they would think.
Let's talk about Rossi, because I feel like Rossi's in a really interesting spot right now. I mean, it's a guy who obviously he wins his rookie year, and it's always been one of those where it was such a weird year. It was on television, which it never was, because it's the 100th anniversary, and he doesn't win because he has the fastest car. He wins because they're on a fuel strategy and that's a legitimate win. But he's been with first Andretti and now Arrow McLaren, and it's felt like his equipment has failed him. It's almost like he's having a better version of Marco Andretti's career in that he won a 500, but he's only got 8 wins. I mean, he's run 135 races. He's won 8 races. He's got 29 podiums, and he feels like a really, really good race car driver who has either has had bad equipment or not a great team setup or has opted for the wrong things. He clearly, I think, has the best car that he's had probably since he won the race. Maybe that one year where he was in contention up until about the last 20 laps. I think that was 2019, maybe. But I feel like there's a stratosphere for Alexander Rossi that he could hit with a second win that he probably won't get without a second win in Indy, because a team championship or a driver's championship for the course of a season feels basically impossible for him right now.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And it's interesting when you look at his career, how much he kind of helps. He's in the Aaron Rodgers category, where an early Super Bowl suddenly, I mean, you look at Rodgers' career, he's had a lot of playoff unsuccess, but because he has an early title, it's like, oh, he's clutch. It's like, is he? like maybe not.
I mean, you look at his Indy. He actually is clutch. Here's his total finishes in Indy. Obviously, 1 in 2016 on a timeshare team. Which that's even more impressive. Was 7th the next year. Was 4th in 2018. Was 2nd in 2019, and I kind of throw 20 out. He was 27th that year, was 29th the next year, but then was 5th in 2022 and was 5th in 2023. I mean, that is a dynamite performance.
No, he's great. I'm just saying, with only 8 other wins, if you took away that first 500, I mean, he has it, but if you take it away, suddenly it's like, all right, it's the guy who's really good at Indy, who's, kind of mid the rest of the time. So no, I think that would be interesting. It also, you wonder if he gets a second 500, if then he's like, all right, I can now go to F1. Like, now I have the resume to get the hell out of here.
The thing is, and this was shocking, I was looking at ages. He's 32 years old. He's going to be 33 in September. I mean, he's kind of out of F1 range now. I gotta say, the ages of the racers is pretty fascinating to me. So did you know, who would you guess is older, Newgarden or Rossi?
That's a great these are young guys, and then it's like, no, like McLaughlin's probably like 29 and Power's like 37. I think that, well, you just gave me you gave me half the answer. I'm gonna say I bet I'm gonna say Rossi's older based on what you just said.
Newgarden's older. Newgarden's 33. It's funny you say McLaughlin. McLaughlin's 30 and is about to turn 31. And Will Power is what did you say, 38? No, he's 43 years old. He's the same age as Ryan Hunter-Reay, believe it or not. So that's it's interesting, because a lot of these guys, I think, maybe are thinking, oh, I'm gonna be able to make that jump. Like, Pato O'Ward could probably still do it. He's 25, but Alex Blow's already 27.
Wow.
And so for a lot of these guys, they're not going. The IndyCar is about where they're going to be, which doesn't mean that the winning or losing the race is any more or less important. But it is interesting contextually, the idea that you're going to get any of this particular field able to jump up to the F1 level. especially without Andretti having a team there that might, be more receptive to certain drivers, I don't think it's going to happen.
I'm going to throw one more, what this does to their legacy win category, and that is Joseph Newgarden. So he wins last year. He's with Team Penske. I'm hopefully you can pull up like his overall stats, but he has a championship. He has a good number.
29 wins, 52 podiums, 17 poles, has won the series twice. And obviously what?
Oh no, sorry. But if he wins the 500 this year, this is a stamp where he's now won back-to-back 500s, which puts you in pretty rarefied air. But he also, this is kind of a silly thing, but it's something true. One thing that brought Elio a little bit of differentiation is he had a victory celebration. Like climbing the fence was part of that thing. It's a kind of like, I want to watch the race. And I have a lot of friends who are not into IndyCar, but it's like, if he wins, I want to see him run up the fence. The Newgarden thing of going under the fence into the crowd was really cool last year. If he does that again, that's kind of like, that's something that's wildly different than anybody's ever done. So I think there's a real moment here for Newgarden to grab hold of this series and really stake his claim of being, it's 33 now, so next. But really, he will have a moment and he'll put himself in a stratosphere that he's not in with, again, that unlike some of the other one-time winners like Ryan Hunter-Reay or Rossi, I think if Newgarden wins again, or Power, Newgarden would be able to vault to a whole nother level based on back-to-back and kind of having a shtick, so to speak.
I agree. I mean, right now, so that particular, like, who's the best youngest driver, like that combination of clearly, like with this, so basically I'm excluding Will Power. I'm excluding Scott Dixon because, as you said, they're both on the tail end of their careers. So it's like right now, to me, and I would actually argue that while Scott McLaughlin has certainly performed quite well, he's not really in this conversation either right now. So to me, right now, this is a 2-horse race between Joseph Newgarden and Alex Palou. Those two are essentially fighting for the alpha status in the series. And Palou, he's been so good in so much of his time in IndyCar. And you look last year, he won 3 races in a row and 4 out of 5. The one that he didn't win in that stretch was Indy. And this year he comes in and he's won 2 races. He's had a podium. He's finished 4th. He's finished 5th. He's been the most consistent driver that hasn't cheated so far this season. And so I agree. It's like to have won the title, the racing title of the series in 2021, 2023, currently leading in 2024. If he's able, especially with this equipment package, which does not seem to be on the same level as Penske's equipment package, if he can win this year, that I think cements him as the top kind of mid-level driver, mid-age driver, the alpha of the series moving forward. So I do think that that's a fascinating implication.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else that would be interesting.
At this point,
any of the back markers, no offense, but Stingray Robb wins and just be like, wow, that's insane.
What the hell just happened? Yes.
Connor Daly or, Fittipaldi or Lundgaard or, I think a very Graham Rahal would be interesting. The last to first has always kind of been fascinating. I just don't think he has the equipment or the team to get there. The only one out there is Marcus Ericsson, back row, but he seems to have just really struggled with his car and have any kind of setup. But, if he wins, that's a first, a second, a first in a 3-year span. That would be quite a stamp for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also another boring interview. Just another, wow, this guy's really not fun.
No, it's I think I go back to Herta. He's the one guy I think his career might be enhanced the most by a win. Because again, this is a guy who's he's young.
Right? He really is young, I think.
He just turned 24.
Okay, that's young.
At the end of March. And he's got 7 wins in 86 races. He's got 14 podiums. He is still at kind of that very beginning. The concern with him is, how dialed in is Andretti? Like how much are they really going to be able to do out there? And whereas Kyle Kirkwood,
kind of that same Mario Andretti thing where he burns really hot and it's like, can he keep it together for 500 laps?
Yeah. Whereas, Kyle Kirkwood's got 2 wins over 38 races, and those are both of his podiums. Like he's had a couple of shining moments, and then he's kind of been he's struggled. He's been mid table at best. I feel like Herta, there's a lot of things to potentially positive come out of that. And so that'll be interesting to watch. But anyway, should be fascinating, Scott. Any final thoughts? We got to wrap up here as we're kind of at our time limit, but any other things just generally you're looking at as we go into the race?
No, I mean, it's always, I love all of the pre-race ceremonies. I think we're having Jordan Sparks sing the national anthem. That should be good. Jim Cornelison is back for the Back Home Again in Indiana. I moved a little bit this year. I moved a little bit more into section, the B stand. So I'm excited to see that. New seats. I always kind of bounce around a little bit in the same general area. No, I'm it's always fun. It kind of always catches up to you. But if you're, I don't really have any other outstanding thoughts. It's going to be fun, exciting. I got a new scanner this year. That's what I'm excited about. I got a new scanner. I think it's going to work a lot better. And I'm excited to use that. So there you go.
I'm proud of you. That's great. Well, I mean, it should be a lot of fun. I hope everybody that's going gets a chance. I mean, I was hoping they would have announced that they're going to lift the blackout by this point, but
that's a whole nother discussion. We
did that last year. We're not going to do it again, but someday they'll learn. Maybe.
Well, we know what'll happen again next year, so we can do it every third year. It can be like our triannual blackout discussion.
Anyway,
I want to thank everybody for listening. We'll talk to you guys next year. Those IndyCar fans who stuck through.
That's
we'll
right.
see you next year for the 500.
Don't ask for content. We gave you content. If we see you at the track, or if you see us at the track, give us a wave. Come over, say hi. We'd love to talk with you. Anyway, for Scott, I'm Galen. Thanks for listening to CrimsonCast. As we head into Memorial Day weekend, have a safe time. Have a wonderful time. Get out on a lake. Do some grilling. And while you're at it, bring back the bison and Candy Stripe the Rock. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.